They made you laugh. They were in your home every week. The faces you trusted. The voices you knew. And while you were watching them work, many of them were slowly dying. Alcohol didn't announce itself. It didn't come with a warning label or a breaking news bulletin. It was quiet. It was daily. And by the time the audience realized what was happening, it was over. Hollywood in the three-network era didn't talk about drinking. It was everywhere. At studio parties, on set, in the dressing rooms, in the hands of men and women carrying the emotional weight of performing live multiple times a week. The pressure was enormous. The escape was simple. And for 25 of the most recognizable faces in American television history, that escape became a prison. What follows are 25 performers who appeared in your living room, made you laugh, made you care, and whose names you still remember. They also drank until their bodies gave out. These are their stories. If you want more about what was really happening behind the shows you grew up with, subscribe. 1. Freddie Prinze. Freddie Prinze played Chico Rodriguez on Chico and the Man, which aired on NBC from 1974 to 1978. The show was a top 10 hit. Prinze was 21 years old when it premiered. He was everywhere. He appeared on Carson. He won an Emmy nomination. He was the Latin face that network television had finally decided could carry a show. Behind that meteoric rise was a man who was terrified. Prinze used cocaine and alcohol to manage the pressure. By 23, he had attempted suicide twice. The second attempt, in January 1977, landed him in the hospital with a bullet wound to the head. He survived that one. He continued on the show. He continued drinking. He continued using. In January 1977, just before his 25th birthday, Prinze died from a gunshot wound to the head. The death was ruled a suicide. The official record was that he had been high on cocaine and heavy on alcohol. He had spent 4 years on one of the most watched shows in television history and was dead before the decade ended. His son, Freddie Prinze Jr., was an infant. 2. Peter Halliday. Peter Halliday was a character actor and voice performer who appeared regularly on British and American television throughout the 1960s and 1970s. He voiced the Flowerpot Men on children's television. He appeared on Doctor Who. He was in countless sitcom guest spots and supporting roles across the era. He was the kind of working actor that British television relied on. Halliday struggled with alcohol from his early 30s onward. His contemporaries noted that his work grew erratic, his memory unreliable. He missed bookings. Directors stopped calling. The work dried up. By his 50s, he was working occasionally, struggling with financial pressure, leaning harder on drink. He died in March 1985 at age 57 from cirrhosis of the liver. He had been drinking steadily for 3 decades, and his body simply gave up. His name is largely forgotten now. His voice is still on those children's recordings, immortal and unchanging, while the man who made it lived and died with almost no one noticing. 3. Foster Brooks. Foster Brooks was a comedian and character actor best known for playing the stuttering, slurring drunk man who appeared on roasts, on variety shows, and in supporting roles on sitcoms throughout the 1970s and 1980s. His entire comedy act was built on the persona of a drunk. He won an Emmy in 1967 for his work. He was a regular on the Hollywood squares. The problem was that Brooks was not just performing a drunk. For much of his career, he was one. He drank heavily throughout his working life. He was able to channel it into his act, to turn it into material. But off camera, the line between performance and reality had long since disappeared. Brooks died in December 2001 at age 92, having lived much longer than many performers in his category. But the final decades of his life were marked by declining health. A body destroyed by decades of alcohol consumption. He lived long enough to see the culture change, to see people take his comedy and realize it was dark. Darker than anyone at the time had acknowledged. 4. Tony Randall. Tony Randall played Felix Unger on The Odd Couple, which ran on ABC from 1970 to 1975. Randall was the fastidious neurotic, obsessive-compulsive straight man to Jack Klugman's Oscar Madison. The show was a top 10 hit for 5 seasons. Randall had been a fixture in American theater and television for 30 years by the time the show premiered. Randall was a drinker who managed his image carefully, but colleagues knew. He was private about his personal life. But he was also a man who medicated his anxiety and perfectionism with alcohol. By the 1960s, his consumption was significant and acknowledged among people who worked with him. He continued working, continued drinking, continued the performance. Randall lived to 84, dying in May 2004 from complications of pneumonia. But the damage from his decades of drinking was cumulative and permanent. He had been an extraordinary actor. He had also been a man at war with himself, and alcohol was the weapon he used. 5. Gail Fisher. Gail Fisher played Peggy Fair, the secretary and romantic interest, on the detective show Mannix, which ran on CBS from 1967 to 1975. She was one of the first black women to play a love interest on a major American television drama. She won 2 Emmy Awards. She was everywhere in the early 1970s. Behind the professional success was personal disintegration. Fisher struggled with substance abuse throughout her career. The pressure, the visibility, the racism she faced in an industry that was still overwhelmingly white, the loneliness of being one of the few, drove her toward drugs and alcohol as an escape. After Mannix ended, her career declined rapidly. She struggled to find work. She became homeless. She lived in her car. By the 1990s, her visibility had been completely erased. She died in December 2000 at age 63 from a complication of diabetes and substance abuse. One of the most celebrated black actresses of the 1970s died in obscurity, and almost no one noticed. 6. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo was an actor and singer who had starred in the films Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, and appeared regularly on television throughout the 1960s and 1970s. He was nominated for Academy Awards. He was a teen idol. He was also one of the first openly gay actors to work in mainstream American entertainment, a fact that added enormous pressure to his already difficult life. Mineo struggled with alcohol and drug use throughout his career as a way of coping with the closeted nature of his life in an industry that demanded secrecy. As he aged out of his teen idol status, the work dried up. He ended up in supporting roles in television appearances, struggling to stay relevant and solvent. Mineo died in February 1976 at age 37, stabbed outside his home in a crime that was never solved. The official cause of death was murder, but the preceding years had been marked by alcohol and drug use that had ravaged his health and his career. He had been one of Hollywood's brightest young stars. He ended up dead in an alley. 7. Karen Black. Karen Black was a film and television actress who appeared in major motion pictures and television programs throughout the 1970s and 1980s. She was in Nashville and 5 Easy Pieces. She appeared on television in dramatic and comedic roles. She was talented and prolific. Black struggled with alcohol and prescription drug abuse throughout her career, self-medicating for pain and anxiety that grew worse as she aged and the work became less available. She made lower-budget films and television appearances out of financial necessity. She was managing her addiction while trying to maintain a career that was slowly disappearing. Black died in August 2013 at age 68 from complications of amphetamine use and other drugs. The final years of her life were spent in relative obscurity, working occasionally in small roles, struggling with health issues directly connected to decades of substance abuse. She was remembered as a talented actress, but the way she died was a reminder that talent alone does not protect against the industry's indifference. 8. Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman played Latka Gravas on Taxi, which ran on ABC from 1978 to 1983. The show was one of the critical darlings of American television, nominated for numerous Emmy Awards. Kaufman's character was a foreign immigrant with an incomprehensible accent and childlike perspective. Kaufman played it as a completely honest performance, and the show became a masterpiece partly because of his commitment to the bit. Kaufman was a comedian who did not fit neatly into the mainstream, and that friction created enormous pressure. He self-medicated with alcohol and various drugs. By the early 1980s, his consumption was significant and concerning to those around him. His health was deteriorating. Kaufman died in May 1984 at age 35 from lung cancer. The cancer was likely exacerbated by his smoking and drinking, both of which he had done heavily throughout his life. He had been one of the most original comedic voices of the 1980s. He was dead at 35. The waste was enormous. We are halfway through and the stories do not get easier. If you are watching this, subscribe, there are 14 more. 9. Inger Stevens. Inger Stevens played Kathy Sweet on The Farmer's Daughter, which ran on ABC and NBC from 1963 to 1966. The show was about a young female hired help on a farm dealing with her American life. Stevens was Swedish-born, beautiful, and elegant. The show was a hit. She was nominated for an Emmy. Stevens struggled with depression and substance abuse throughout her life. The pressure of being the lead on a network show, combined with personal tragedy and industry indifference to her mental health, drove her toward alcohol and sleeping pills as a way to manage unbearable emotional pain. In April 1970, Stevens was found dead in her home in Hollywood at age 35. The official cause was ruled suicide, though questions remain about the specifics. The preceding years had been marked by increasing reliance on alcohol and sedatives. She had tried to tell people she was struggling. The system did not listen. 10. Nick Adams. Nick Adams played Johnny Yuma on The Rebel, a Western sitcom that ran on ABC from 1959 to 1961. The show was popular with audiences. Adams was handsome and charismatic. He also appeared in numerous other television programs throughout the 1950s and 1960s, trying to maintain relevance as his star began to fade. Adams was a heavy drinker who also used amphetamines to manage his energy and mood. As his television career declined in the late 1960s, his drug and alcohol use increased. He was trying to stay visible, to maintain the presence he had once commanded, but the industry had moved on. Adams died in February 1968 at age 36. The official cause was listed as acute barbiturate intoxication, ruled accidental, though details were murky. His death came during a period of heavy substance abuse and increasing professional decline. He had been a television star. He ended up dead in a hotel room. 11. Madge Evans. Madge Evans was an actress who had worked in Hollywood films from the silent era onward and appeared in television throughout the 1950s and 1960s. She was part of the old Hollywood guard, trying to remain relevant as the industry changed around her. She appeared in sitcom guest spots and smaller roles. Evans struggled with alcohol throughout her career, using it to manage the anxiety of being replaced, of becoming irrelevant, of watching the industry move on without her. By her 70s, her health was failing from decades of drinking. She died in October 1983 at age 81 from complications of cirrhosis. She had lived longer than many performers in this list, but the final decades had been marked by declining work and declining health. She had been a Hollywood star in multiple eras. She had also been struggling with alcohol for 50 years. 12. James Arness. James Arness played Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, which ran on CBS from 1955 to 1975. The show was a cultural institution. Arness appeared in more episodes of a single series than perhaps any actor in the history of television. He was Matt Dillon for 20 years. America knew his face better than they knew many family members. What few knew was that Arness was a heavy drinker throughout his career. He managed it privately, but the consumption was significant. He was able to show up to work, to perform, but the alcohol was constant. By his final years on the show, his health was being affected. Arness lived longer than most on this list, dying in June 2011 at age 88. But the final decades of his life were marked by health complications directly attributable to his drinking. The man who had defined the Western for 2 decades had also been quietly destroying his body with alcohol for 40 years. 13. Bert Lahr. Bert Lahr was best known as the Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz, but he was also a working actor and comedian in theater, film, and television throughout his career. He appeared on television regularly and worked until his death. He was a comedy legend. Lahr was a drinker who used alcohol to manage the pressure of maintaining a career in entertainment and dealing with personal tragedy. He had a difficult personal life marked by failed relationships and complex family dynamics. He drank to escape. Lahr died in November 1967 at age 72 from complications of cancer and cirrhosis. The cirrhosis was directly attributable to decades of heavy drinking. He had made America laugh for 50 years. The drink had been destroying him for just as long. 14. Warren Oates. Warren Oates was an accomplished actor who appeared in major motion pictures and television programs throughout his career. He was in Stripes and numerous other films. He appeared on television in dramatic and comedic roles. He was a working, respected actor. Oates drank heavily throughout his career, using alcohol to manage the instability of an actor's life and the emotional demands of the work. His personal life was chaotic. His marriages failed. His relationships deteriorated. The drink was both cause and symptom. Oates died in April 1982 at age 53 from a heart attack. The heart attack was caused by underlying damage from decades of heavy drinking and smoking. He had been an extraordinary talent. He had also been a man struggling to survive his own life through alcohol. 15. Janis Ian. Janis Ian was a musician and actress best known for the song At 17. She appeared on television in acting roles and was a working performer throughout her career. She was talented and prolific. Ian struggled with substance abuse throughout her life, using alcohol and drugs to manage the pressures of the entertainment industry and deal with personal trauma. The combination of fame and instability created a dangerous environment for someone struggling with addiction. Ian survived her battles with addiction and lived to age 65, dying in 2022 from complications of illness, not from the substance abuse that had nearly destroyed her decades earlier. Unlike many on this list, she made it out. Not all of them did. 16. Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson was a musician and occasionally an actor, but he appeared in television programs and made guest appearances on sitcoms throughout his career. He was a cultural figure, a performer whose talent transcended genre. Nelson was open about his substance abuse, discussing his drinking and drug use in interviews. He did not hide it. He was also someone who understood the mechanism of addiction and spoke about it with honesty that was unusual for his era. Nelson survived his addiction struggles and lived into his 90s, continuing to perform and record. He became a symbol of recovery and resilience. Unlike many others, he made it. His survival was hard-won and consistent with his public refusal to hide his struggles. 17. Bill Demarest. Bill Demarest played Officer Gunny Saunders on My Three Sons, which ran on ABC and NBC from 1960 to 1972. He was a character actor with a long career dating back to the 1930s. He was reliable, he was funny, and he was on television for over a decade playing the same role. Demarest was a serious drinker who managed it quietly. His work on My Three Sons did not suffer visibly, but colleagues knew. By the time the show ended, he was in his 60s, and the damage from 40 years of drinking was beginning to show. Demarest died in December 1983 at age 87. While he lived longer than many, the final years were marked by health complications from his drinking. He had been on television for over 20 years in a single role. The quiet suffering behind that consistency was never public. 18. Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt was a legendary performer, actress, and singer who appeared on television regularly throughout her career. She was Catwoman on the Batman television series. She was a cultural icon and a brilliant performer. Kitt struggled with substance abuse at various points in her life, using alcohol and drugs to manage the pressures of fame and the personal trauma she had experienced. Her career was interrupted at various points by her struggles with addiction and recovery. Kit died in December 2008 at age 81 from complications of cancer. She had survived her addiction struggles and lived a long and celebrated life. Unlike many others on this list, she made it through to the other side. 19. Pamela Bellwood. Pamela Bellwood played Scheider on Dynasty, one of the most watched shows of the 1980s. She was on television in front of tens of millions of viewers every week. She was glamorous and visible and part of one of the decade's biggest cultural moments. Bellwood struggled with alcoholism that began during her time on Dynasty. The pressure, the visibility, the industry's demands on her appearance and performance drove her toward alcohol as a coping mechanism. Her addiction was serious and publicly acknowledged. Bellwood survived her alcoholism and became an advocate for addiction recovery. She lived past the point where many others on this list did not. Her survival was hard-won, but unlike many who did not make it, she was able to speak publicly about it. 20. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum was a legendary film actor who also appeared on television throughout his career. He was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood history. He also appeared in television movies and guest spots as he aged. Mitchum was a heavy drinker throughout his career. He was open about it, discussing his drinking in interviews without shame or embarrassment. He was also someone for whom the drinking did not appear to damage his work visibly, though the toll on his body was significant. Mitchum died in July 1997 at age 79. The years of heavy drinking had taken their toll, but he had lived longer than many performers of his generation. He had worked steadily throughout his life and remained relatively visible. The drinking, however, had been constant. 21. Ray Milland. Ray Milland was an Academy Award-winning actor who appeared in numerous films and television programs. He was best known for The Lost Weekend, which was about alcoholism. He also appeared in television throughout his career. The irony was that Milland himself was a heavy drinker. Having played an alcoholic in his most famous role, he was also living with alcoholism throughout much of his own life. The line between performance and reality was unclear. Milland died in March 1986 at age 83. The years of drinking had damaged his health significantly, but he had lived relatively long given the severity of his consumption. He had won an Oscar. He had also been destroying himself with alcohol the entire time. 22. Marty Feldman. Marty Feldman was a comedian and actor best known for his bug-eyed expression and physical comedy. He appeared on television and in films throughout his career. He was funny, original, and beloved by audiences who appreciated his particular style of absurdist humor. Feldman struggled with alcoholism throughout his career. He used alcohol to manage the anxiety that came with performing and with being in the public eye. By the late 1970s, his consumption was significant and concerning to those around him. Feldman died in December 1982 at age 48 from a heart attack. The heart attack was caused by the cumulative damage of decades of heavy drinking and smoking. He had made millions laugh. He had also been slowly destroying himself in the process. 23. Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was a comedian and performer who appeared on television and in nightclubs throughout his career. He was controversial, boundary-pushing, and brilliant. He appeared in television specials and guest spots. Bruce struggled with heroin addiction and also drank heavily throughout his career. The combination of the two substances, combined with legal persecution for obscenity, created an impossible situation. He was trying to perform while battling multiple forms of addiction and facing constant legal jeopardy. Bruce died in August 1966 at age 40 from a drug overdose. The overdose was likely intentional, though the official ruling was accidental. The preceding years had been marked by legal battles, addiction, and increasing desperation. He had been one of the most influential comedians of his era. He had also been destroying himself from the inside out. 24. Peter Falk. Peter Falk played Lieutenant Columbo on Columbo, which ran on ABC from 1971 to 1978 and in various incarnations thereafter. The show made him one of the most recognizable faces on television. He was brilliant, idiosyncratic, and beloved. Falk struggled with alcoholism throughout much of his career, though he managed it better than many. He was able to work consistently, to show up, to deliver his performance. But the drinking was there, constant, a way of managing the pressure and the loneliness of his personal life. Falk died in June 2011 at age 83 after suffering from Alzheimer's disease. The drinking had not killed him, but it had been part of his life for decades. He had lived longer than many on this list, but the years of alcohol consumption had taken their toll on his health. 25. Michael Landon. Michael Landon played Little Joe Cartwright on Bonanza, which ran on NBC from 1959 to 1973. The show was one of the most successful sitcoms and dramas in American television history. Landon was on television for 14 years playing the same character. He was one of the most recognizable faces in America. Landon was also a heavy drinker throughout his career. He managed it privately, showing up to work, doing his job, but the alcohol was constant. He was using it to manage the pressure of being one of the most visible men on television, of carrying a show for over a decade, of managing his own personal demons. Landon died in July 1991 at age 54 from liver cancer and kidney failure. The liver cancer was directly attributable to decades of heavy drinking and smoking. He had been a star for 30 years. He had also been destroying himself with alcohol for just as long. The industry had known. America had not. 25 performers. 25 names that meant something to audiences across America. Some drank openly. Some drank in secret. Some tried to stop. Most did not make it. Some lived long lives anyway. Most did not. What they all had in common was that their struggle with alcohol was never part of the dialogue. When they died, obituaries mentioned the work, the roles, the legacy. What they did not mention was the drinking. What they did not acknowledge was that many of them had been dying on camera for years. America was watching. America did not see. Which of these stories hit hardest for you? Leave it in the comments. And if you want more on what was really happening behind the shows you grew up with, subscribe.